I'm Fatheree,
I'm Sean from Trick on the Tube.
I'm Larry, Dr. Trek.
and this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 133rd installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we talk all about Star Trek all the time. And tonight, I am joined by a returning guest and friend of the show, Trek on the Tube. How you doing, buddy?
Hello, how's everybody doing?
And we also have a very special guest with us, Dr. Trek himself, the one, the only, Larry Nemecek. Larry, thank you for making it. We normally don't allow Oklahomans on the show, but we are more than happy to make an exception right now. So glad to have you here.
Okay, I'm just like, in the interests of IDIC and everything lovingly Star Trek, I'm going to just bury all the Texas idioms that I haven't used in ages. I won't even say anything about being in Texas, and we'll just move right along. So.
Fair enough. Yeah, we are gathered here right now to discuss the state of the franchise. We sometimes do this in the past. We've had our state of the franchise addresses, kind of like a president will do a State of the Union, though not this year, because like they don't do it if you're like the incoming president in your first year. It's like just like an address to Congress, right?
This got really into the the poli-sci weeds real fast.
With the Star Trek franchise, it is looking like a little different than it did like this time a year ago, I think. And there's been a lot of big changes and a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline. So I just thought it'd be a good idea to just kind of reflect on everything now with, no new shows coming out in the immediate future. It's a good time to kind of just like check the pulse of the franchise and talk about that.
Some of us have been calling it a buffet of choices. It's like little me in say the 90s wanted, this is like what I wanted all along. This whole idea of everybody thinking in like, here's the Next Generation box, and here's the original series box, and here's the DS9 box. It's like, it's a friggin' universe where we were doing this way before, Star Wars was clunk along with one movie every 2 years for a while. And then would, have some little books and little comics and trading cards. I mean, it's like that was the Star Wars universe. They finally cranked it up with some, animation and TV and all that. But it's like Star Trek, as usual, wrote the book on something. Everybody else picked it up, and then Star Trek backed away from the table for different reasons. It wasn't our fault. Fans wanted more and more. But it's finally happening that people are using the Star Trek universe in all these ways. And in a way that when people were all like, everything was fixated on Discovery's troubled beginning, and it was like, oh, this is horrible. What are they doing? And then finally, it's like, get us to the point where Picard is out there, and then get us to the point where an animated show. Oh my God, yes, and Lower Decks. And so now it's like this whole idea of there's a buffet, and maybe you don't like every course on the buffet, but you can walk along. And if you really want to gorge on Star Trek, you can get something of everything, and you might like that. Or maybe you're a little pickier and you're staying away from the Asian, or you're staying away from the seafood, and you're just hitting the turkey and dressing. We finally have a business model that supports this, and like I did when Next Generation came out and the old fans were griping about it. And I was like, shut up. This is exactly the way to the future. And now I just want to go, shut up. If you don't like everything, A, they're learning to write Star Trek serialized, and it's a fact of life today. Get over it. And B, there'll be something for everybody eventually. and they'll keep evolving how they write, and then they'll evolve the format styles. So like, shut up, don't cut anything off the knees. So anyway, so yeah, it is a great time. And in the last year, people are finally starting to get that. And I think the most radical thing in the last year was people going, oh, that animated show was actually not only funny, but like funny within the family funny, not funny outsider making jokes funny. And there's actually a lot of pathos in it. And, you know, by the end of the season, it was like, oh, I think I enjoy this better than the other two live shows now. I mean, there are a lot of people that have been like totally revolutionized by that. So
I think more than that, Lower Decks is like, just putting aside the fact that I find it good. And some people don't find it funny. Some people find it really weird. I think the fact that it's different to this point is what really opened people's eyes, because yes, we can argue that Picard is kind of different to what Discovery is, but at the end of the day, both shows are kind of serialized. They kind of go for the big overarching doomsday plots, and they do resemble each other in a lot of ways. They were made to be both very cinematic, but Lower Decks is just a completely different beast, not only from Lower Decks and not only from Picard and Discovery, but also from every other Star Trek we've ever had. Lower Decks is not even like the animated series, right? And so this is the thing, I think, that really opened people's eyes to, oh yeah, we're getting that buffet. And I haven't been waiting for this for over 30 years, because I am not even over 30 years old. But ever since the Marvel Cinematic Universe came out, and, you know, everyone's been talking about the big industry, like, oh, DC are trying to do the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Harry Potter's trying to do it. And you're sitting there going, but before I was even born, Star Trek was already a cinematic universe.
thank you.
Yeah.
Star Trek has been a cinematic universe since, I guess, maybe the animated series almost, because, maybe Next Generation, depending on how you look at it. But it's great now.
Or the motion picture, since the beginning of the movies, and you had
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, when it actually became cinematic. But I think it was in '87 when you have the Next Generation on air, but then you have an entirely different story every couple of years with a TOS crew movie.
But you have the McCoy McCoy cameo in that first episode, which really links everything together, and that's where it all begins, right?
And then no other connecting tissue for a while
until like Spock,
until Sarek shows up in season.
You
3.
have to say his son. You can't say Spock. You have to say his son. Yeah. But, you know, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have 15 memos to talk about 30 years later. So it's all good.
Well, you know, speaking about like the history of Star Trek, Larry, can you just let our audience know, in case like they're not familiar with you, just give us like a little bit of like your history with the franchise of Star Trek.
He started a YouTube channel last year, and he didn't know anything about Star Trek before that.
Yeah, he's a little late to the party, I think.
I'm sorry, I'm still bumping along with like 1,200 on my list. So
you need to watch the original series, Larry.
Okay, so that's the one with the yellow skin guy.
That's the one where they paint them black and white.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, thank you, Mrs. Pollard. Now Mrs. Kincaid, my 9th grade science teacher, who got me to start watching after school when there was no bloody A, B, C, or D. Yeah, so I was a fan, and I immediately after the second or third go around of daily watching, when you go, oh, they said that over here, and then they said that over here, and you know, when you'd find a book or a magazine, and that was the days when there was the World of Star Trek, and that was all there was, or there was Starlog #1, and it was a one-off, and it was all Star Trek, or the tech manual and the blueprints, oh my God, came out, and I'll always remember the day I got the tech manual, took it to school, 4th hour geometry, looked at Mike and Cliff and went, see, I told you, the shirt color matches the patch. Yeah, that's how far back that goes. But yeah, fan, but then I had a lot of interest in a lot of fandoms and did a lot of stuff, but flash forwarding to, I was an astronomy buff. I was a model rocketer. I built models. I stamp collected. Blah, 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 blah. I loved history. I was a NASA kid before I was a Star Trek kid. And I come at Star Trek from all of that. And so I would love the bits when Kirk would do a speech and say, think of it, all throughout history, Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, Lee Kwan. And, you know, and it was like, oh, it's like, I saw how you did that. And, you know, and we never heard about Lee Kwan again, but you got, and then now we're talking about Khan and, you know, in that speech. And that's what I loved about Star Trek. It was like, it's us. And I didn't think about it consciously until years later, but it's like, it's us in the future post NASA. And of course we didn't blow each other up because we had to get along, or else we would have we'd have killed ourselves, or we would have killed the planet. So of course, all the idicness of Star Trek, of course, or else what's the story? And I realized years later, I can like, so many people stopped and had to talk about, oh my God, Spock, or oh my God, positive aspirationalism, and oh my God, tech geeking. And I'm like, well, yeah. Now let's look at this. So it's like world building and all the cultures and everything was like what I loved. And that's where my passion went into. And it wound up leading me into star charting and a lot of other stuff. And we do gap filling, what I started calling, for years and years and years. And the medical reference and the tech manual and Bijo's concordance and all the early stuff pre-internet. And then I was on the well committee and answered questions. And all that leads into the movies coming out. That's awesome. I'm a fan. I'm starting a club. We're doing the stuff. And then Next Generation comes out. And I'm like, okay, somebody needs to do Bijo's thing for Next Generation. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it for myself and 50 friends, and yay. But that's where my passion was going. And then basically it got to LA. The writers are using it because no internet, no memory alpha, not even people keeping memos in house. And the writers are using my stuff on Next Gen. And that got me the contract to do the Next Generation companion. So all the things that I'd grown up with before everything went digital. And I was like, here's how I would do it. And I got handed the keys to do it. So that was awesome. And then that led to moving to LA and getting to edit the Communicator magazine, which was the official magazine for years. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just gap filling, it was doing behind the scenes. And everybody's here. And I interviewed people for the books. And I kept that up and wound up with like 600-700 hours worth of interviews over here that all need to be digitized still. And working on the fact files and doing all kinds of behind the scenes projects, and my wife working on Voyager and yada, yada, yada. And then everything blows up. It's 2005. Everything goes away. The world changes. It's the digital revolution. Suddenly you've got to have a YouTube show with 150,000 people on it, or who knows who you are. And nobody cares that you wrote one of the 2 biggest selling Star Trek nonfiction books ever and all that. And so, yeah, it's been like 15 years of reinventing and finding your way here and paying bills still somehow. But that's it, kids.
Well, that's also something that the Star Trek franchise has had to do in recent years, was kind of reinvent itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we've gone through a lot of changes in recent years. I guess starting with the end of the Rick Berman regime, with Enterprise leaving in 2005. And yeah, I always think like Star Trek is like, you know, it's kind of like one nation, but there's founded long ago, and then there's like different regimes in charge. You know, you start with the 2 genes back in the day.
Adams and Jefferson, and then
there isn't a general election, but yeah.
Then you kind of get the Harv Bennett regime in '82.
Well, and then it overlays. You've got Harv carrying on the movies while the young kids are doing the TV show and figuring that out, and then they go away, and then they hand the keys to Rick to do movies and TV.
Yeah, and then J.J. Abrams shows up for a little bit, and then he leaves to go to the other Star franchise.
He stole the keys and just ran with it.
Guys, the keys were laying there in the middle of the street, and nobody wanted them.
No one wanted them.
Yeah.
J.J. was like, I'll take them.
So then he became little kid Kurt, that driving the car.
Yeah.
He pimped the ride.
But now we have the Alex Kurtzman regime and the era of streaming, with the 2020 being the first time ever there were 3 different Star Trek shows coming out within 1 year. That had never ever happened before.
They're like semi-series, somebody would say. I love how people would get all off on about, oh, look, it's the old thing of the 3rd season and it finally settles in. And I'm like, well, it's really like 1.5 seasons in human years, but okay. Or in dog years or whatever.
It's changed. The format has changed.
Years. Yeah. But it's like we're all living at the same speed now, so, you know. Okay. The thing about when everything blew up in '05, and it was partly about the digital revolution is happening, because I was like, what am I going to do now? Because everybody I worked with and everything we did, everything retrenched, because the conventional wisdom was Star Trek is old and tired and, isn't viable. And it'll be 20 years before there's Star Trek, if ever, again. And yeah, JJ kind of blew that up for the suits and the bean counters. But for fandom, we were all out here screaming silently, going, no, no. And that's when, and yeah, thanks to YouTube and the digital revolution, like the fan films were taking off. And it was kind of in slow motion at first, when it would take you, on your dial-up modem, it would take 3 hours to download one act of like Phase 2, New Voyages or something at the very beginning. But there's all these people screaming, and and Rick's kind of covering his rear and saying, well, we've got franchise fatigue. And I'm like, no, we have producer fatigue. There's a whole franchise fandom out here screaming, and they're watching Doctor Who come back, and they're watching Star Wars come back and going, but we did all this stuff first. And we did, we pioneered all these things first, and now we're the kids out begging in the alley for scraps, and everybody else is at the big boy table. And boy, there's a tortured bunch of metaphors together. But it was really maddening. And then the upside of JJ shocking the world and saying, yes, and in my deal with Paramount, I want to do a Star Trek movie. And like everybody's like, what? The suits and bean counters like, what? You really want to do that? You want to waste one of your opportunities to do a dead, tired Star Trek movie? So even though you might disagree or even say, like I was like, fine, this makes sense. Yay for not blowing it up as a reboot. They left it as Prime and did an alternate universe. I just think it's a waste of time, and this will burn itself out when everybody gets tired of this in 3 or 4 movies. But okay, fine. Everybody's treading water. We're treading water. But it's like the fandom didn't go away. Everybody was out there. It wasn't fandom fatigue. It was producer fatigue. And part of that's, though, has been figuring out how the digital world is doing this. But for me personally, like 2010, I left my slides at home accidentally, and I had 300 people in a con room to talk to. And it dawned on me that part of just doing Star Trek fact is what we're doing right now. Is like nobody was like looking at Hollywood and fandom in fandom history, Star Trek, and just the way the entertainment world worked. And like people like, why aren't the Star Trek actor, the Kelvin people, Chris Pine, etc., why aren't they coming to conventions? And I'm like, because it's a movie only. They're not in a series. And I went, a lot of that kind of insight, like nobody knows that. So that became, it's like, let's try to, it was a whole new side of what you could do at conventions and fandom, and sharing the knowledge was like, busting out of just here's Star Trek fact, history, trivia, tidbit, and putting some of those real world looks to it. And now in, 10 years, now we've got a whole podcast and a whole YouTube army of people doing that. And it's awesome, because 10 years ago, people were not savvy that way. And that's all changed in the last 10 years. And it's given a whole new impetus to fandom. And then all of a sudden in the back door sneaks a whole new generation of shows, and bang, and here we are.
Like, have you noticed like kind of a change in like the behavior of the fandom and general audiences, both like in their reactions? Because I think there's definitely been like a big shift in a positive direction. When we first were getting those JJ movies, and then we first got Discovery, there's a lot more negativity than what I'm seeing now. Have you noticed that too? Yeah,
and I think there's 2 or 3 things there. One is, I think, again, people are just savvier, and people are happy to. It's even when you can intellectualize something could happen or something is about to happen, or you hear news and you see people attached to something, and you go, okay, intellectually, this could happen, or I'm sure this has happened. You could read Mike McMahon's book, and it's like, here's his sense of humor. So, but it's on a page, it's black and white. Somebody might actually have to read this, even though there's lots of cartoons and funny pictures. But it's like, what will that look translated through? He's not a one-man band. He'll have to go through and get approvals, and have to have a crew of people doing it. But what will that look like as an animated series? And as I keep saying, online fandom is a sliver of actual fandom. There are a lot of people, it's like politics, it's like sports. There's a whole world of, you get so into that ecosystem, that you forget that there are people just kind of casually, I'm that way about even my sports teams now. I have so little time. I can't sit there in the heat of the last half of a season in college football. I'll get into things and keep up. And then I'll fall off as soon as the bowl games and the championships are over. And that's the way people are. So there's that. And then even going to a con, the fandom looks and feels and sounds different what you see represented at a live event, like even a big one like Vegas or San Diego Comic-Con. That's different than what's online. You never see the haters live at a Star Trek con, right?
Yeah, no one like pays money to go to a convention to complain about something.
Thank you. So we talk about fandom, it's all that, but I think it's not just that it exists, it's like more people are just aware of it and take that into consideration, and more people are coming. The Kelvin movies brought tons of people in. Now all these series are doing it, being on a paywall. It's slower going. I can't wait for Prodigy to be on Nickelodeon, being on a channel that's on a lot of people's basic cable or basic streaming lineup, their apps anyway. So it's this 10 years is, to answer your question, it's felt more positive, but I don't know if that's that people are, like 2 years ago on Tuesdays Live, I said I had a show called Who Mocks the Mockers when it was really starting to look like ugly YouTube was taking over, but that was echoing the culture. Yay on Star Trek when Discovery premiered, it was on the radar of mainstream. It's like your reward for your recognition that you're in the mainstream is that now everybody's attacking it for being as SJW vehicle for two women of color being the leads. It's like, congratulations, you've now made the big boy league of being attacked. Because before that, you were like off wandering in the world. You literally were in the desert, right? So it's like a backhanded, compliment. But that's all going. I said, who mocks the mockers? We've had you guys. We've had so many YouTubers, and my gosh, there's a new fan film. There are actually more Star Trek podcasts now than I think announced fan films. I think we passed that.
Yeah.
I think we passed that.
So many podcasts.
More people are just savvier. And more people, it's not an intellectual exercise. More people are seeing what having more and more courses at the buffet, what it actually tastes like, feels like, looks like. And I think it's like, okay, things are settling down.
That's the big shift that I've seen in 2020. And I don't mean to disrespect when I say this, but I kind of equate this to commercialism. And I'm not saying that every fan or every creator out there is making a podcast or a YouTube channel to get that money. But that's the shift that I saw in 2020. I very, very naively thought that Star Trek Picard would help the few YouTube channels that were talking about Star Trek that we were, because I thought, hey, Picard's going to be popular, and so everyone's going to come check out our little channels, the few of us that were. But that was completely wrong. I was mistaken. That was stupid of me. What happened was all of the big channels decided to make their Star Trek channels about Picard. And so it took away from us instead of giving us the views. Anyway, point is, that's the big shift that I noticed in the fandom. People, like when there was only Discovery, there was a thing, it was fun to hate on Discovery, right? It was fun to bitch and complain and say that the show sucks and what have you.
You got the Klingons wrong. I never heard of Spock having a sister. And
as much as I agree that the Klingons are wrong,
me too.
there was a thing online where there was that kind of energy and everyone wanted to hate on it. But now you're at a point where the energy has shifted, where we have to name a few, the Trek Cultures and the Trek Centrals, like these big powerhouse channels that are pushing this content. And Picard did that. Even if I think Lower Decks is a more successful show, Picard is the thing that did that. Because
remember how Twitter melted down when Patrick walked out on that stage at Vegas.
Oh, God.
And it trended for 24 hours. And I was like,
chaos.
There you go.
Discovery showed people that Star Trek could still exist, but with Picard, all of these people tuned in and they watched Picard and they tried to understand what it was. They tried to fit it into their what they remember of Star Trek being, and that's what really put Star Trek back on the map. And I think it's what put it back on the map in the landscape of 2020. And then following that, we have Lower Decks, which brought in like a whole new generation of people. A completely different fandom too.
Snarky anime fandom.
Yeah, as much as
Swim fans.
Exactly. As much as I don't compare Lower Decks to Rick and Morty, because even though Mike McMahon worked on both, I don't think they are similar at all. I really think Lower Decks looks more like Final Space, the other animated show. Um, it brought all of those Lower Decks people, and I know so many people that think Lower Decks is, just for Trekkies, but that's not true. All of my coworkers, they don't watch Star Trek, they don't care about it, they're over it, but they loved Lower Decks, and they don't need to understand all of the Lower Decks references. They just, when I watch The Simpsons, I'm not old enough to understand half the references they're making. I still like The Simpsons. You know what I mean? It's popular
Well,
culture, it's politics. Same thing with Star Trek.
that's what Lower Decks can do, and it's animation, so it tricks. Animation will always trick people and thinking, "Oh, it's just animation," and they come in. Those people you were talking about though, like at work, had they not ever like just dabbled? Is it like did it help that they were living in the culture where Next Generation was like everywhere, and they at least got a little of it?
No, because these people are younger than me. The thing is,
Okay.
these people come from.
Well, then look at the writing staff and people working on the show,
That's
and
it.
they just bring
That's
that
it.
sensibility to it. Yeah.
So they know about the people that I work with know about Star Trek because I'm a Trekkie. So inherently, every time I see a movie or a show, I have to equate it to Star Trek somehow. I'm like, oh, but they've already done that in Star Trek because that's just how we are. We're annoying people. But they've never watched Star
55
Trek.
years. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. But these people have never seen Star Trek, and so they know about Star Trek because of me, but their siblings don't care. And it's like all they knew is, believe it or not, the power of Mike McMahon's name. So first we have Picard, which is this huge mainstream thing in 2020. Then you got Lower Decks, but we also had a huge, and for all the shit that Kurtzman gets, the Star Trek Day 2020 thing, the event that they did online
Well,
with
that's
all of the panels. That was so good.
That was
And
great.
it was so great, and it was heartwarming to see all of the cast and the crews come together. It was, and I'm not one of those
even
channels
more
that,
than you would see live at a convention.
yeah, I'm not one to sit there and go, oh, we need positivity and what have you. I'm just like, it is what it is. If you don't like something, you're allowed to criticize it. You don't need to be positive all the time. Even overwhelming positivity can get annoying. But that was a very good move because everyone kind of came in with a celebration of the franchise that they love.
Oh, and look, human beings, a lot of the people, all of the different casts, even in a Zoom box, even in a big grid gallery, Brady Bunch grid, they were jazzed because they, even at a convention, maybe the most they'd ever done was said hello. When conventions would just stick with cast, or maybe, here's some Klingon actors past and present. That would get about as creative as it could get, maybe. And even in a Zoom box, in the pandemic lockdown, they were jazzed to be with each other where they could actually talk back and forth across the generations.
I've never been to a convention. I've been to a few Comic-Cons, but I've never been to like a Star Trek convention, right? And it's like when you got like a favorite musical artist, but you can never go see a concert. And it's not because you're not the biggest fan of that particular artist. You love that artist. It's just like you don't have either the money or the time, or just, sometimes you can't. And I could never make it to like a Star Trek Las Vegas. But for all of the fandom to be able to kind of unite and sit there and watch these Zoom calls, and as you say, they can do a panel with all the doctors, and all the doctors talk to each other. They can do a panel with like the younger writers and like the younger generation, and then the older generation. I don't know. It was great. I think that was a big thing that helped. 2020 was probably the best year from the current Star Trek.
And for everybody, griping about CBS or Kurtzman, all that, CBS is now putting the bucks into the promotion. The fact that we've got, that fans, or not even fans, some of the professional people trying to make a buck and I don't mean that in condescending. Well, there are some that deserve condescension, but just people trying to bring some quality to it. And you can't do that as your B job at 2 a.m. all the time. It would be nice to have full-time people working on it and not even like crowding it out with other franchises, having a dedicated Star Trek. And they've got 10, 15, 20 people now on the social media, promotional video, and it comes and goes. It's hotter when there are shows in, but there is so much media, quickies, shorties, and things that you see a fan trend take off. Like it was this last week. It was funny when all the Bernie memes took off after the inauguration. and everybody's doing their thing, and there's billions of them, and there were 100 whatever of Bernie Trek memes, and they were cool. And kudos to somebody at StarTrek.com for going, let's just collect these. And kudos to them, by the way, the last couple of years of not caring about politics. They just, it's like, well, if we're supposed to be so damn aspirational and positive and unifying and representational of everybody, in the classic old Star Trek way, it's supposed to be the classic old American way, then let's just go for that. And they've had political people and political slants and coverage, but so nobody batted an eye about something as innocuous and goofy as the Bernie meme. And they did it in like the next day, like in the middle of it, exploding. And I was like, good on them. But that's just like a tiny example of, because I know the way that used to work. It was like there's, in the 90s and the aughts, they were begging, people knew that, could do tons of things, but people were begging for money and budget to have an army, because it was just 2 or 3 people or 3 people, 4 people doing that on top of other things. And you just would cry to be able to do something. And of course, everything's exploded now anyway, digitally and socially, but they've got a team to do that. And so kudos to them. So when you're talking about those panels being organized, you've had savvy people having been through the first generation of what to do, and now getting it, that like, look, what is so hard about doing this? Nothing. And look at the good we've done within the fandom. And,
even on the fan side, like the Seventh Rule podcast organized their big event as well, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. You've got it. It's like it was a revolution just to have professional writers who had grown up as fanboys and fangirls. Like that was a revolution just to have Ron Moore and Renee Echevarria and Ira percolate up with real cred to get to have the keys to write shows in the 90s. And now you've got real fans coming up through other aspects to be able to do like that. I mean, it takes a while for the new thing to happen, and then for Trek fandom to assert itself coming up to the ranks to be able to make the decisions, to make those things, to be savvy about it, and not have it be second nature, or, oh, what are the kids doing now? We've got to learn that,
Well, there's this funny thing where people like to say, Star Trek takes the first 3 seasons to really get going, la-di-da, because they always refer to like TNG really gets good at its 3rd season, what have you. But it's interesting to kind of note that I say 2020 now is when we're getting really good with our Star Trek, just like overall, I don't know, the overall state of the franchise, I think, is really picking up. But when you think about it, it's like 3 years. But it's not 3 seasons of a show. It's basically 3 years of Star Trek in the streaming landscape. And so it was just, and Star Trek, or CBS, I don't know who, but someone needs to kind of get a bit more savvy with what you're talking about. They're getting there with the memes and what have you, but we need like a united YouTube channel. We need a united social media front where you can have all the trailers and everything comes out on the same thing and everyone can watch the same trailer. There's no region blocks, that kind of stuff. But we're getting there, and then we need that powerhouse Paramount Plus single streaming service where everyone can get all of their Trek at the same place. But we're getting there, and
that's the end game. They just got to wait like these Bell Media contracts in Canada to expire. I think that is the ultimate goal, is that everyone in the world will be able to watch all of Star Trek exclusively on Paramount Plus.
I was actually surprised that they decided to release Lower Decks with Amazon. So this deal must have been signed like months ago, because if I were Viacom CBS, I would have been, we're going to drop Lower Decks on Paramount Plus internationally, like when it comes out. That would have been our big sell. Like, we're dropping Paramount Plus internationally, Lower Decks is on it.
As one of the big, like, out of the gate bonuses.
Yeah,
but again, what's the country by country, population by population? Because you're big outside U.S., Canada, it's the UK, Germany, and Australia.
It's UK, yeah, that's right.
Like, what's the status of Paramount Plus going to be in those 3 countries? And even like another year? Well, what about now? Look how everybody's been crying. And I know, I hear about it because we've got so many Austrians and Germans and Brits in all my, my Portal 47 community, and just people who are on the live shows and things. But like, they've been crying, and they're all good fans. Like, they had the wherewithal. We were laughing about, buying VCRs in the U.S. and taking them back so the American friends could send tapes back in the day. But they've all they know how to rip shows and get them, but they're all good fans. They're also not stupid, and they know that if they want more, there's got to be money from somewhere. And it's like, I will pay you. This is really old. This is Popeye, but it's like, I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. But it's like, I will pay you if you would just let me.
Yeah.
It's like, shut up
Please
and take my money now.
Just generally speaking, the download world has changed. The industry is very afraid of illegal downloads, but what they don't understand, I think, when it was possible to start downloading illegally,
we're like at Napster stage here or something. It's like with music 20 years ago or something.
When illegal downloads, be it for shows and music, began online, I think everyone just started doing it crazily. But and I noticed this with my generation, with a lot of people that are my age or younger, we have this thing where we understand that if we don't support, be it the content creators on YouTube or the artists, that if we don't support them, then they won't make more stuff.
What are they supposed to eat? Where are they supposed to live? Right.
I illegally download albums, like music. I don't download a lot, but I'll download it, I'll listen to it once. If I like it, I'm out there in the store and I'm buying the physical copy. If I don't like it, then I trash it. I'm not going to keep it anyway. You know what I mean? It's like a sample. I listen to my sample. You know what I mean? A lot of these artists nowadays, they put it on YouTube. You can listen to YouTube 133, which is a good move. I think that's a good move. But we're not idiots now. We understand that you need to buy things. And so that's what I like, and everyone does that. I think the Star Trek fandom is the same thing. Like if someone goes out there and does something that's not right, it's because they know that in the end they're gonna buy the product, they're gonna pay for the service. But it would be nice, not necessarily for the US because like in Europe and the rest of the world, it'd be nice if everyone could have everything on the same thing. Like they don't have to pay for Netflix and Amazon and Paramount Plus when it comes out, because it's getting to a point where you need like $150 a month just for your streaming services with the Disneys and the HBOs and the
people complain about that in the States being that way also, but
it's still cheaper than cable. I have a bunch of different streaming services, but I mean, like I don't know what it would add up to, but it won't be anywhere close to what a cable bill would be.
What we all want really is when you go onto like the internet, you open your internet, your navigator, your Chrome or whatever it is. You just want to type in like the movies. And then when you go into the movies, there's like all of the movies from everyone. It's like, I don't care if I need to pay $100 a month, but if every single movie is there, from like all of the black and white oldies to like all of the new stuff that comes out, like you just want the movies, and then you want like the TV shows, and you just want to go on there and watch it.
Yeah, just have access to it.
Yeah, that's what you.
That's kind of what we've moved to, where
computer turn on Star Trek: The Next Generation. That's what you need. But
people don't buy as much physical media, and I own like the original series. I've bought 4 different. I had the VHS collection. I had the DVDs when they were just putting like 2 episodes out on a disc. Then I bought like the Blu-rays, and then I bought the Blu-rays again for the big 50th anniversary box that included the animated series. But whenever I watch it, I just
remastered animated series.
Yeah, I just pull up Netflix or CBS All Access and just watch the episodes on there, and I don't even like bother with the because it's so easy. And if I just want to check something real quick, like, oh, what did Spock
aren't
say?
You so happy to have that box though? Don't you just cherish the big black box?
Yeah,
because you'll be glad when the big EMP goes through and everything digital is wiped out, and you'll have
you can still watch your Star Trek.
Yeah, that's my doomsday scenario prepping right there. But that whole notion of having access to everything, I think, is critical to something with like this deep 55-year history, a franchise that has that. Because if you want to go see Unification 1 and 2, if you're like, why is this called Unification 3? Oh, that was a Next Generation episode. Maybe I should watch that. And
maybe there's a clue in there.
I also think that they need to really so Disney Plus, when they first pulled out The Simpsons, they had the remastered version. Problem is, they had the aspect ratio change on it, and a lot of people got pissed off because if you're missing yay big of the screen, because it's zoomed in, then you're missing a lot of visual gags from The Simpsons. So Disney Plus was like, okay, let us just fix this, and now you can change the aspect ratio when you're watching the show.
You can toggle, right?
Yeah.
So it's like what Star Trek did when they did the new effects on the Blu-rays, but they let you watch the old bad matte lines.
Yes. They need that on Paramount Plus, and they need that. You need the original effects for and I know it's less important for like TNG than it is for TOS because the effects weren't that changed. But I think it would be interesting to do that. And even for the movies, you drop Wrath of Khan or the motion picture, you need those director's cuts and the theatrical releases. Everything needs to be on there, even if it's like in a tab, like extras, bonus. You need all of those things so that people can go back and watch that.
But also, after you've been around the block a time or two with it, and you're reading history and you see what people were upset about or what they critiqued or what they fought and won, you don't want to lose the whole reason for that. You don't want to lose all the, all the proof of what that to bring it life. You don't, or just like act like none of that happened. That's part of the story, the building blocks of fandom that was the give and take between audience and creators and accountants and money people that got Star Trek, hit and miss, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, whatever. It was still an amazing story. I don't care what other thing people dress up as at Comic-Con now. Nothing is Star Trek. Nothing is still Star Trek. This is not taking away from anybody else, but Star Trek is unique for about 47 different reasons. It still is. And you don't want to blandify any of that and take it away. And no, not every kid who sits down and is thrilled by Lower Decks right now is going to care about that. But at some point in 5 or 10 years, they will be, or they could be. And just because a little bit of time's gone by, things are classic for a reason. And here's a topic, I don't know if I've talked about this with you guys or whatever, but there's a whole, and I totally get it, but it's another generational-ish matter of time is I see online, it has to be younger fans, because anybody else experienced this across culture. But I see younger fans who say, sincerely, I really want to watch the original series and I just can't stand to watch it. Like as a production. Like I can only take 5 minutes of it and I want to watch it. And that's what gets me. It's not like they're bashing it, and they're going toxic tuber on it. They're doing it. And I just want to go, not being old man on the lawn screaming about it, but I just want to go, so have you ever watched like Casablanca? Have you ever watched, or the other direction is, have you ever watched anything else that was on TV in 1966? Because it's like part of the reason that there are classics is that they stood out in their time. And 40 years later, it's easy to lose the context, and context is not for kings, it's for everybody. So part of this is just letting people experience enough that they get savvier, they get a little more sophisticated. They're not just making the pronouncements of life on 18 years or 20 or 20 years. And I'm not knocking having fresh blood and new eyes. That's awesome. And we need that. But that's a thread that I've seen lately. And it's touching is that I see people like sincerely in pain because they want to.
I feel that though, because I grew up on Voyager and Next Generation. And so my mom, she used to have those two things, right? And she didn't have Deep Space Nine because she didn't really get it. She was like, and then
no one got that show except for I was the only person who's like, this is the best Star Trek from like day one.
Okay, so she's on the other end of that spectrum.
To me, it was just another Star Trek. But anyway,
once we got to France when I was 12. She was like, all right, now I'm going to buy it, because she had taped this from like, you used to hit pause when the ads came on so that you didn't tape the ads, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So she said, let's buy everything. So she started buying everything, but she started buying from the original series. So my first watch of the original series was when I was 12. God, I didn't understand what the hell I was watching. I was sitting there like, I've never seen anything this old. Like the oldest movies that I had seen with my mother were like Some Like It Hot, that kind of stuff.
That's 50s. I mean, black and white. Yeah.
But it's like one movie. You know what I mean? You live through like the 2 hours of it. It's fun. It's a thing. But I was watching these and I was really confused at like the pacing of the original series, because it is only one story. There's very rarely like a B plot or a subplot going. It's a one, and then the pacing of it is like, ooh. And then I had this thing where I would watch
quality. There's some that are awesome and there are some that are draggy.
Yeah. I would watch one episode with my mom, and then, she would be like, that's enough for me for tonight. And then I would go back into my room and I'd be like, you know what? It's not enough for me. So I'd watch another episode. And eventually what happens is I had like a huge lead on her, but I would still watch the episodes with her. So I was watching this double. And then I did that with all of the Star Treks, because then she bought them all in order, and then she loved Deep Space Nine. And then so we watched them all, and I watched them all like 2-3 times just because And that's when I really started understanding. And as my knowledge and understanding of television and movies grew, then you appreciate the original series more. But I can, I understand where these people are coming from, where they're like, I'm trying to watch the original series. It's not that I want to hate it. It's just that like it's old. And I understand that. I understand that. I kind of
And
went
that's
through
why
that.
I say it's just a matter of life experience. It's like eventually you're going to understand why other things are classic just because they were made before yesterday.
But the same goes for the other way around. I understand it when people on my channel, because I have I have an older demographic on my channel. I understand when they come and they're like, you know what, Lower Decks is so fast paced, and there's just jokes, and you know it's always moving, and even the voice acting, like the talent for these voice actors on Lower Decks is insane. Because you watch a normal sitcom, and then you watch like one of these new generation animated sitcoms. They speak so fast, like everything has to be so quick and snappy. And I understand when I get people that say like, hey look, I'm it the other way around. So instead of being younger and they can't watch the older stuff, these people are older and they can't watch the younger stuff. It's like I can't follow, I can't keep up. And I get that.
Well, a lot of, and I heard that a lot too, and I did that. I mean, the beginning, I was like, oh my God, this is going to, it's like there are more, and you're taking canon notes, or you're taking like notes on there's more to notate in a 25-minute Lower Decks than there is in a 43 or 50 or 60 minute.
Lower Decks is exhausting for that Mike McMahon.
It is.
Come on.
It is.
Yes.
But the point is, it's compressed because it's that manic pace, and it's fine because. But what it really is like, I don't know if this, but it's like when you go to, hopefully not a lower quality one, but even a top-notch quality, say a Shakespeare production, and they haven't modified it. It's the original text. It takes you 5 or 10 minutes to get your brain and your ear up to, the first few minutes. I feel for anybody having to deliver major exposition in a Shakespeare production, because it takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes for your ear and your brain to get in sync. And after you're going for a while, you're totally up with, assuming it's a good production, the actors are doing their job, you're totally up with it. But there is a time when you've got to get your ear used to that pace. And Lower Decks is the same way. The first time out, and I think my least favorite scene of all Lower Decks is the teaser of the first one, where she's drunk and in the hall and it's manic. I almost think it was like written later because they decided that his dictating a log and her and now that's how that starts. Almost like the normal opening was too slow paced or not a grabber enough or something. But anyway, I just look at Lower Decks that same way. It's like once you get your ear acclimated, and then after 2 or 3 episodes, you don't need it at the beginning. And
it's the same way for the original series, except you're going instead of trying to keep up with it, you have you just have to settle into the groove of it.
Yeah, I told someone that recently who she said that she was really struggling watching the original series. She was trying to get into it, and I told her that you do have to kind of like fine tune your receptors to be ready for like that style of just how they made content back then. But I also stressed to her that like some of the stuff in there you might think is a little goofy, and it's okay to think that that's goofy, but there's like good stuff too, and you just have to keep in mind the style back then. Things were stagier is the word I think I've heard Larry use to describe it before. Yeah, it is more melodramatic, but that's kind of part of the fun of watching it, because it does have like that bigger than life stuff sometimes. And you also have to keep in mind that back then they had some of the most well-respected science fiction writers trying to make like a very serious show. They were taking it very serious. It wasn't made to be like this hammy thing. We're
looking back through our perspective, like back. It's like, look at where they came from. Twilight Zone. I mean, see, a lot of this stuff used to be, we all knew it because, okay, this is why that experience about stopping 10 years ago and realizing there was a need to not just talk Star Trek fact, but to link the culture and Hollywood and the way things were done and the way the business worked and all that together, and tech changes, that all that was reflecting on Star Trek, because we started to have a generation that was coming up, whether they liked the Kelvin movies or not, that didn't know all this. Like, if you didn't experience it firsthand, then it's like what good historians do about something from the 18th century, the 19th century now. It's like, it's not just word, whatever. It's like remembering what daily life was like for poor people, for middle-class people, for rich people, and then filter it through that. And you go, oh, Or this obscure reference over here, like Shakespeare scholars did. This obscure word really meant the thing that you did to go to the bathroom in your bed at night. I mean, it's like, oh, that's what it is. And having that, it sounds sad, but having that come alive and making that another layer of richness for something is a thing now. I'm sorry that Star Trek's been around 55 years and we have to do this. And that's a thing to do. But guys, like, there are kids now that watch Next Generation and Voyager and DS9 and talk about how slow moving it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, all that's where, but the other thing is, like, here,
Some of those episodes are really slow.
Yeah. Well, there's two things. One is, when that started happening, I started thinking, what is the best original series show to somebody like that? Is City on the Edge of Forever the best one for that? I don't know.
My fear with that is that it's such a unique situation
it's atypical.
in that story. Yeah, like, most of the episode is they're running around on Earth.
I actually think the Man Trap can work. I mean, it's the first one that they aired.
Yeah. Well, but it's still see, even like,
it's predictable. I mean, anyone's gonna guess. Anyone's gonna know that Lady is villain, right? Everyone's gonna guess that. Because of the way it's done.
I mean, it doesn't hide that from you.
It doesn't even hide it. It's got the musical. It's got the musical stings, and it's got the visuals, and she's changing her appearance, and like Like, but I think it's still work. I think it's still a good indication of what Star Trek the show is going to be.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe, and if you get the remastered version, so people don't like glaze over with old visual effects. Like Doomsday Machine, or some of them that just, like, they have, you've got to go to the best of the shows to start with if you're going to do that for somebody today. And then it's like, what are the surface features that they can't penetrate to get, to? And if it's really a gripping guest star or actor, or the situation is just so that you stick with it, even if you're...
Balance of Terror could work, actually. That's a good one.
Because submarine shows by nature are like a little slow moving and...
Yeah. It's using the slower pace of the original series to its advantage. It's not an issue as you could see it, right? It's using it as the thriller element.
By the way, podcasters and YouTubers, that's my gift to you. What original series episode would you show to somebody who can't stand to watch the original series, who thinks they can't watch it? But but bringing that whole thing about, here's what I wish I'd have besides that angle of it. Like I said a minute ago, I want to have like a clip roll of 8 or 10 leading 1-hour dramas from 66 to 68. And that changed. I mean, by the time Star Trek went off the air, the Mod Squad was kind of revolutionary, and Mission Impossible and Mannix were kind of revolutionary, but just like, here's the average drivel that was on TV for people. And like, you think this was whatever, go down the list. Here's what else people could be watching, But the thing is, as far as science, this is what I was trying to say. Science fiction, we look at it backwards, and we talk about the science fiction writers. Almost all those science fiction writers, when you get to it, Gene, and then John D.F. Black, and then Gene Kuhn, like everybody talks about Ted Sturgeon and Amok Time. And Harlan's famous story about Sitting on the Edge and how they bastardized his writing. Most of what sci-fi guys were writing was so out there. That's what made it appealing before Star Wars and before 2001. Like, the only good cinematic science fiction past Melees and From the Earth to the Moon, like Day the Earth Stood Still, or Forbidden Planet, or War of the Worlds. I mean, you get past that, and then you get into like hokier things, and maybe there's, King Kong, it's about the dangers of atomic radiation, adjusting to it. But after a while, you get away from like production value, and it's hokey, but the spirit is still there. But you get off of 4 or 5 or 6 movies, and then forget TV. That's why Twilight Zone was so revolutionary. They had a cheap budget. Nobody, maybe you had a makeup appliance, maybe one optical effect. But other than that, they didn't need budget and, whatever. It was the story, and it changed. But it changed every week. It was anthology. So Star Trek was still, and Lost in Space, yay, regular show, but Lost in Space. So Star Trek was the first serious science fiction, regular character show that was out there. And that's kind of why it was revolutionary also. So, but people don't get that looking backwards at it.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything
Sci-fi
to someone
cinematic.
trying to watch
Yeah.
it now for the first
Yeah,
time.
that was the
big
first sci-fi, cinematic
cin-
on TV. It really was. You know, they
Because the
broke
real
Hollywood.
revolution came in like in the 70s with like Alien and Star Wars and
Well, the Star Wars thing, you know,
Westworld, like all
1999
of that
came
came in
along
later.
to try to fill in for Star Trek. When Star Trek's bubble got big, not only did Lucas get financing for Star Wars, but that's when 1999 was produced in the UK to kind of the promotional things would say it was basically saying, hey, are you missing Star Trek? Well, here's something new. I mean, that was basically their whole, you know, and then Star Wars set off its own, everybody had to copy Star Wars after that. But yeah, I've lost my thread. But anyway, but it's like, that's what the whole thing about going back in context and seeing, and Star Trek, talk about being cinema TV, you know, they started off with Howard Anderson there at the Desley Lot, and famously they couldn't handle it. One of the Anderson brothers or nephews, like they the first 6 months on one of the pilots are going to the series, and they're like, when are we going to get some effects? When are we going to get some effects? And they finally go into the screening room, and I think this is in Bob and Herb's book. They're sitting there waiting, like, we haven't heard, and they sit there, and there's like 6 seconds of a ship fly by, and they're like, where's the rest of it? And he like has a meltdown. It's like, that's all there is. I can't handle this, you know, and gets up and like runs screaming from the room. And they're like, oh, so they looked around and got like 4 other effects houses in Hollywood. When people turn off the switch on the original visual effects because they want to watch the Blu-ray remasters, do that. But just remember that all of Hollywood on TV time and budget, and time as much as budget, both, all of Hollywood had to pitch in to get those effects in the original series done every week.
They won Emmys for the effect for the
yeah.
original
And
visual
it
effects
was
in
cutting
the
edge
original series.
stuff. And like
it
people
was,
say it was
but
like
it
a
was
cheap
hard
show.
to do because it was hard to do on a movie. In a movie, you had 6-9 months and maybe a little bit more money, and to crank it out 26 times a week, that was just like, it was hard enough for the costume people to get, you know, so they could afford uniforms, and the non-union Asian ladies throwing the uniforms over the transom, and nobody talked about that, you know, or having Hua Chang do his effects because the clunky Desilu guys in the prop shop couldn't get anything that looked decent enough. I mean, they were doing so much revolutionary, radical stuff. It wasn't just the writing. It was like, get the damn thing done. And so, you know, so that's all context, and that's what you don't want to lose that if you. Okay, I'll shut up. I've gone off on this for a while.
But no, that's a great point, and that it was the first to do that, and the original series is not only the shoulders that the entire 55-year franchise of Star Trek stands upon, but so much other stuff, like we were talking about, other franchises, this stuff that's huge today, like the Marvel stuff or Star Wars, all of that stands on Star Trek.
And just like Next Generation revolutionized the 90s sci-fi boom, and, you know, Xena and Hercules.
To put on my critique cap, well, we talk about like the state of Star Trek today. The revolution that the original series was in that time, and the revolution that the Next Generation was in that time. As much as I love Lower Decks, I appreciate Picard, I don't think that any of these 3 shows that we have now are a revolution for science fiction. And Star Trek is a thing that does and there is a big point to be made about the representation aspect that Discovery brings to the table and all of that, and that's very good for that audience, and it's nice to know that Star Trek is participating in that discussion. But I don't think we have a revolutionary science fiction show, or like we don't have a Game of Thrones or a The Walking Dead. Not that I want to show in those genres of vibes, but those shows changed the landscape of television. It changed the way television was made, and it was released, and it was there were watch parties for Game of Thrones in bars. Not in the end, but and we don't have that with Star Trek yet. And I know that I'm asking Star Trek to essentially release the best show of today, but that's what I expect from Star Trek, because that's why it exists. Yeah, Strange New Worlds might be that, but I don't think it will be, because the Next Generation the Next Generation went further, and I think that what we need is something that goes further, and that's like, hey, this is, I don't know, anyway, Discovery can't be that because it has baggage, sadly. Discovery will never be that show because it has too much baggage.
It didn't get to start off as a unified vision.
It didn't get to start off as a unified vision, but there has to be a show coming down a pipe somewhere. One of the 50,000 pipes that they've activated, they've turned on all the valves. There has to be something that just pushes the envelope so much. Anyway, Denis Villeneuve is a genius, and the way he works on science fiction movies, from Blade Runner 2049 to Arrival, I need something like a show that just delivers something like that. You know what I mean? Black Mirror, when it came out, was huge. It was like no one's really seen this kind of thing before. I wouldn't even mind an anthology show. I know it costs a whole lot more to do anthology shows, especially in like a world where you have to create bridges and sets and stations and stuff. But I don't know.
Star Trek can't do anything too different, because then the fan base freaks out if they do something that's too different. They're like, "Why are you doing this? Just make it like old Star Trek."
Well, if you look at short treks as a lab exercise, a lab theater, then we're in a better time to be like when I was a kid and I had all these ideas for other shows. I knew as long as they had to be that 7 years, 26 episode, you're going to clunk along with one or two things at a time mainly. And that's all they would say. Oh, the market's saturated and can't do more than that. This is awesome today that you can go experiment. And maybe it's not a short trek and maybe it's not a 10 episode series. Maybe it's a 3. I mean, I don't think it's happening now, but I think, the Wrath of the Khan on SETI Alpha 5 series that Nick was maybe working on, that was going to be 2 or 3 hours, I think. Just, a short mini series, even on streaming terms. But, you can, and you can still do a movie. You can still do a TV movie or whatever. I mean, the slate is wide open. Look at how we look at DS9 now versus in the day. Look at a lot of things, how we look at them now, good or bad. And I keep coming back to, what are people going to say? Kind of what you were saying. How are people going to look at Discovery 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Or Picard, or Lower Decks. Like, how are we going to look at these series? And of course, we can't predict the future. We can't predict how cultures are going to change and the way, the pendulum swings on everything, on the original series and on Next Gen, and it will. But what is the first take, just with the first round of some hindsight? How will Discovery? It's already so schizophrenic because it was what it was trying to be, and it's like, oh, course correct. Well, we shouldn't have done that. We should
make jokes. We'll make jokes out of a lot of things.
Yeah.
So much.
Well, the Klingons. We all joke about the Klingons now. You know what I mean? Like, they gave Tilly the first
being
officer.
Species diversity. They just didn't explain it. It's like they finally found a retcon idea that worked, and I'm sitting there dealing with Tellarites with the biker Tellarites, and I go, okay, it's species diversity. There was a time when Tellarites let their
double antenna,
their tusks,
Andorians.
Yeah, and why do antenna move on Andorians in one era?
You're the only one that cares about the Tellarites, though, Larry. No one wants to put them on screen. No one wants to put them on screen.
Mike and Manny wanted to. No, I'm talking about it. I want
a Tellarite show.
I'm just saying that of all the founders, when the hell are you going to get some respectful stories about? Much less like, what about the Denobulans and and what was their saga? Why'd they disappear? But that's my point. Is like there's all these aspects, and you could just do a 15, 20-minute short trek and deal with some of this stuff.
I think the idea, though, like in watching the behind the scenes on the Short Treks Blu-ray, I was kind of disappointed by this, but I understand. The objective of the Short Treks is, yes, on one hand, to experiment with different formats and different styles and different
people.
It gives them new creatives can come in, but it's also because Viacom CBS told Kurtzman, we need some cheap content to put out quick.
That's what we're going to get more this year. I guarantee you there will be short treks in 2021.
So it's like, which is interesting because when you think about animation, that's not cheap. Animation is not cheap. But it's like we can use, now we have a Discovery set. Now we have a La Serena set. Now we're going to have an Enterprise set. So it's like, let's just do short treks on these sets that are already around. We already have costumes. Now we have, that the data core room from the Discovery finale is going to be converted into something. They're going to use that big room, right? It's like now we can pump out short treks on the cheap. You still need to pay everyone.
Mm-hmm.
they are at a state now where, with Viacom, CBS, being able to do everything on Paramount Plus, and they could theoretically, start releasing movies too. We're all back one big happy fleet again.
Noah Hawley,
And
where are you with your movie, man?
so they can do anything right now, and that's very exciting. And
Yeah.
In 2020, when we did have that big Star Trek Day celebration that we mentioned earlier, when I was watching all that stuff that day, that was the first time I felt like Star Trek was as big of a thing as it was when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid in the Berman era, there was a 7-year streak where we had 2 shows on the air, basically getting 52 episodes every year, and then a movie every couple of years.
Yeah.
And I was like a baby when TNG started. So to me, most of my life, I thought, oh, it'll just be like this forever. There's just going to be constant Star Trek forever. And then in 2005,
I didn't know how good we had it.
I learned that wasn't true. So this is the first time I felt like those days have returned. And there's a delay in some of these shows because of COVID. But they're shooting things now. We have Discovery season 4, Strange New Worlds, and Picard all about to be.
And part of the awareness now, savviness, also is people that were so scared it was going to be burnout. We're going to have 7 shows, we'll all be burned out. It's like, but they're short, they're tiny, and people are still begging in between. So no, you give one people a focus, one thing to focus on at a time, and leave them wanting more, and that's going to be fine.
And we just had a 23-week experiment with that of a season of Lower Decks, and then it changed to something so radically different with Discovery.
It kills you as a creator. Like as a content creator, it kills you, right? Because you have to create this content every week to catch up.
Now you have a desert again. It's the fallow mini times now.
But no, as fans and for the fandom, it's just great. Like you get to appreciate all of these shows, and even if you're not the biggest fan of, because us 3 are insane, so we're gonna watch, like, if they release 1 Star Trek episode every week for an entire year, we'll watch them all. But not everyone is like us. Like some people might just tune out when it comes to Discovery, or they tune out when it comes to Lower Decks, and they'll watch the shows that they want. It's fine, you know what I mean?
Or they find a time, they get the free month or the free week, and they'll binge everything that free week.
Yeah. But I had people commenting on my channel saying, oh, well, they could make, why don't they make Lower Decks like a 40-minute format? Because they wanted more of it. They wanted more Lower Decks. So I'm thinking, holy crap, that would be just
more Lower Decks.
That would be too much for my brain to take, like a 43-minute episode of Lower Decks. That would be crazy. But yeah, people want more. But I think it's a good thing. I think you need to leave people wanting more. That's a good thing for a show.
So 2 things right now. I think people are excited. I'm excited for Prodigy because, again, I want to see it break through to a non-paywall. Paramount Plus is still going to be a pay channel, right? Mm-hmm. So Nickelodeon is free on a lot of systems. I'm still waiting for it'll be. People thought of Lower Decks as a kids show because it was not. I mean, it could be, but Prodigy is truly going to be a young adult series, and it's going to be on outside the paywall for most people.
It's even younger than that, because Mike McMahon's kids are 2 and 6. Don't quote me on this, but I think that Mike McMahon's kids are 2 and 6, and Mike McMahon has been seeing some like early access or early drafts of this, and so his kids have been loving the show. And I'm thinking if your kid is 2 and able to watch the show and really appreciate it and enjoy it, that might scare some people, thinking, "Oh my God, it's really going to be for youngins." But hey, you know what? I think it's a good thing.
We can sell action figures again at Target and Walmart. That's one thing. The other thing is people are excited. I think people love Anson Mount, so they're excited. They may even be like hoping that they don't ruin Strange New Worlds and the Pike potential, the Anson Mount potential. But I think I know. But the other thing is, I think prior to Discovery, people were going, oh gosh, Section 31, Michelle Yeoh, okay, the Emperor, blah blah blah. Section 31. Are they going to do dark, or are they going to do double dark? What will that be? Is it going to be snarky dark? What's that tone going to be? But now the way they totally tweaked that, it's like they had to hijack. It's almost like the reverse of bringing Worf into DS9. We're going to get the Empress out of Discovery. But the way they did that, it's like, where is she going? What is she going to be? I mean, they've said it's...
I was calling it a soft pilot. I know it technically isn't a soft pilot because they didn't introduce characters or setting, but it was like a backdoor kind of pilot.
Well, it was, but it's a clean slate. You don't know exactly. Now you're just curious to see what she's... But you've seen her question enough. She's not the old Empress.
She's
So
changed
now,
enough. They justified that well enough, in my opinion.
No offense, Bowie and Erica, but I was like, of all the things coming along, the Section 31 was like, oh yeah, you made all these contracts out of the gate early in Discovery, and now, oh look, we've bumped Strange New Worlds ahead of it. Because that's the thing that people are, but now I've done a 180 and I've come back to being curious and excited about what Section 31 might be, much less,
I actually think that
on that.
knowing like when you look at the track record for Boyon Kim and Erica Lippold and what they've written for Discovery, I think that Section 31 will be a much more character-driven show than what people are expecting. I don't think, because you think the Section 31, you're thinking, oh, it's going to be all, I don't know, like action and explosions.
Dark Mission Impossible.
Dark Mission Impossible, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be a little more intellectual, dare I say, than that, much more character-driven, because Erica Lippold and Boyon Kim did some very good work with like the expansion of Saru's backstory and that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm expecting from that.
Does fandom widely know just how much of a fangirl they both are? They're like totally.
I hope they do. I follow them on Twitter. They're good fun.
I mean, they're totally like, name a quote, name a title, name a character. They'll do trivia with anybody. So anyway, the same way, that Ted Sullivan could, the way that Mike McMahon can. I mean, all the way down. So...
Well, everyone knows Mike McMahon because Mike McMahon's been doing, he's been doing interviews and stuff. Hopefully, because Boyon Kim and Erica Lippold, they are executive producers, so they're show running the Section 31 thing. Hopefully, they'll have the same kind of attention that Mike McMahon got when their show comes out. Mm-hmm. Like, I'd like every show and every showrunner, every creative to start getting their little spotlight. And, judging by how things are going, like if they release Section 31 2022, maybe if we have like another Star Trek day, they can come on and do their little panel, and everyone will see how insanely fanny they are, fannish they are about the show, right?
Well, Erica's a little reticent just watching social media and like the first year of Discovery. And I did get to do a sit-down interview with them.
I can understand that.
She's more reticent, but Boy was like all over Instagram and her scribbles, and she had
I can understand that.
But as she's gotten up the ladder and had more responsibility, she's totally pulled back a little bit. But, they've revealed themselves a little bit early on.
Well, there was a lot of name-calling in, those first seasons of...
by stupid people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the age-old thing that people look at a show and they judge it whatever they're going to judge it by, and then they think that monolith of names that are attached to it, that everybody is exactly the same, when they don't get it, that there's lots of discussion and there are a lot of committee decisions and a lot of debates going on, and with what percolates up to the top, what you finally see on your screen has to get through whoever's the top, filter. Now you can go back and you read my stuff on Next Gen, much less anybody else's stuff that's been out for a while. You can see, and people focus on writing. It's the same thing creatively. You'll hear Gary Hutzel talk about how they were going to do a tracking shot from the standpoint of a photon torpedo during a battle. And they had this amazing choreography and, and the visual, and Peter Lordson's like, yeah, that's too long and boring. Cut that. Or, different things people have done that Rick or Paul or somebody would go, until the fanboys really got to then you have like when Ira was getting to run DS9, virtually nobody cared, or when
the Defiant,
when Manny and the fangirls and boys were running Enterprise the last year, and they got to do just because nobody cared because it's going to be canceled anyway. I mean, when you have those rare moments when the fan kids have the keys, and that explains Lower Decks most of all, but increasingly so on. I mean, Michael Chabon, Picard, huge. He's showed his. Sit there and do these one-off answers, and he's just popping stuff out. And when you see the why things happened and the roads not taken and why the choices were made, when that finally gets to that depth, you go, oh. So,
And then that's interesting is the fans are so different too.
Yeah.
Because like Mike McMahon as a fan is not the same type of fan as Michael Chabon. And Michael Chabon writes novels. He's a novelist, which means that the execution of Picard is very different because it's much less fact oriented as, for example, Lower Decks is. Picard is more of like a story, an emotional story that you experience like when you read a book.
The people that lump all the I wouldn't even say the haters anymore. Some people just kind of glaze over because it's just the generational whatever. But the people that keep lumping Discovery and Picard in together just because the visual effects look similar because it's all made this decade, and it's not next gen or it's not this. But somebody basically said, look, they look at Discovery as sci-fi adventure and Picard as sci-fi drama. You've got young bucks running around on Discovery doing their own stunts half the time, and nothing against Sir Patrick, obviously, but you've got an 80-year-old actor who's very fit and trim, but you've got to make allowances for your lead being 80 years old. And that's just going to determine the flow and the pace around him, unless there's some radical change. So just like out of the gate, and you've got a known character versus a bunch of people that have not been known. So it's like out of the gate, they're different. My biggest beef with Picard is that we didn't get Larish again. I kept wanting to go back to Earth just so we could see the Irish Romulan.
Well, maybe in season 2.
I love her.
Yeah, I think they realized that. I think they noticed that.
Wow, she was good.
Those characters were those were the Boba Fetts of the Star Trek Picard. They weren't expecting these characters to
they're going to get their own show then. They're going to be
the
on
Chris
Paramount
Pike,
Plus eventually.
like the Ensign Mount Chris Pikes of Discovery.
They'll give them a short tricks. Like they'll give Rin a short tricks from Discovery.
They should do that. Yeah,
how
totally
cool
do
would
that.
even just a flashback to how he met them in Crisis and got them away? That could be a 15-minute story.
They did that in a comic book.
That's right.
Countdown to Picard.
Comic schmomics. It's
That's
on the
not canon.
screen. Yeah.
Boo!
Look what happened to Hobus. Come on.
It got renamed. It's the Romulan supernova now.
Yeah. How do we know that Hobus wasn't the name of the Romulans? Okay. Anyway, whatever happened to Romii? Now there's a deep cut for you. Okay.
Remus spelled wrong.
That was bad translation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that is something to talk about though, like how they could do like a short track with the two of them, or whatever they end up doing with short tracks. I guarantee that there will be some coming out this year because they have cameras rolling now, but there's going to be a while before we get an actual season of a show. So they're going to pump out a short track just to keep those subscriptions.
What I don't want to see is a short trek about the Romulan War. Like, don't you dare cram it all into 15 minutes.
No, that was supposed to be the trilogy of movies that never got made. Perhaps someday.
Yeah.
I just want to
balance of short tricks. What the state of Star Trek in the state of Star Trek in 2021, excluding short tricks because I don't know about that. I think, and I don't know what their release plans are, but from what I'm seeing currently, I think that we're going to get 2 shows in 2021, and it's going to be Prodigy and Lower Decks, which means the state of Star Trek in 2021 is 2 animated shows. And no live action for Star Trek.
Well, we'll see.
Which is mind blowing, but I love it. I'm all.
We did have one episode of Discovery.
Right?
That doesn't count. Come on.
You know how we all look back at Next Gen and out of the gate, they were like, it has to stand on its own. So we're not repeating anything. We're not leaning on anything from Next Generation.
But they redid the exact same episodes.
Well, one.
They did that one
which
time.
they did as an homage, and that was before. And remember, Dorothy did that, and then everything changed when Dorothy and David left, like early weeks. But they'd already committed that script. But my point is, and Worf, that was like Bob Justin's big thing. Let's have a Klingon, but now he's on one of us. Okay, that was like radical. But other than that, no Vulcans, they were like a side character. And what happens at the end of the first year? They decide they've got to lean on Romulans, right? Neutral zone, and everybody got excited. And a lot of the things that govern not so much like canon concepts even, but just the attitudes. You've had short seasons, baptized in fire. Picard's first season, no matter what people want to critique about it, was a much more settled show than Discovery. Anything could be more settled than Discovery was. And Lower Decks is animated, and they took 2 years to make 10 half hours, but still, it was a very settled show. My point here is not even show by show, but as a whole, as a secret hideout Kurtzman era here, they're getting more comfortable in their own skin about doing things. And one of my predictions is when we actually, whether it's live action or animateds, well, the animateds are already there, which is why I'm curious about what Prodigy's tone will be. But Lower Decks is there. But even as we roll out the new live actions and future seasons of Picard and Discovery, I'm predicting that they will be much more at home. We've already seen it, much more at home with thinking of this as a universe and not worrying about what they're bringing back or not doing. And yeah, you could say, well, they've already had 7, and and she wasn't on Next Gen. And it's like people live in this time frame. They're ripe for using. But that's also true of like the 23rd century too. Like who is around? You're not thinking about actors because they've all passed, but who was around then, and who, T'Pol lives 100 years more and she could be a character. All people talk about that, but the ways, not only what the writers will do, but also the visual people have turned over and evolved enough to where it's not this thing about ego in a good way. Like I've got to show off from my peers so I can get an Oscar or an Emmy. It's like we can embrace being more attentive to details and not having, the Klingon debacle.
Yeah, exactly. It comes back to
and
the Klingons.
touch screens and smart holograms.
It's not about look at the Klingons that I'm going to bring to Star Trek, which I understand. You're a creative.
Or look what we can do today that we couldn't do 30 years ago.
It's not so much about that anymore. It's like, hey, look, we have this very expansive universe.
Just like Sarek was like 3rd season Next Gen. They had Sarek. They didn't have Spock's name, but they had Sarek, and eventually things eased up to where they could embrace and do that. And, finally on Enterprise, it took 52 series, but you finally had a Gorn and a Tholian on Enterprise, and CG to do it. So all that kind of thing today, I think I'm predicting is going to happen. And I think they're just being easier to accept, not only old visualizations, but maybe even, touches from more than Frakes from prior generations. So, and stunt casting. Oh, look, it's the Rikers and all that. So
Star Trek is a swimming pool that was closed up for the winter. And so they opened it up and they've been putting those chemicals and trying to get the pH.
The shallow
right.
end first.
Right. You got to mix it and make the pH right. They're taking out the leaves and everything. And we're finally at that point where summer's beginning and the pH is right. You know what I mean? Like the leaves are out. We can all throw a ball in the pool and jump in there.
The 80s or the 90s or the 20s here. When you say that, yeah.
Where I think Star Trek's doing good at the moment.
Hell of a lot better than it was doing 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I would say this is the best it's been doing in 20 years.
Well, it's the first time since what I figured out that since 99 that there were 2 series going.
It is a lot more commercially driven, like it's.
Then in the '90s, when there was merchandise everywhere, when there was just
I wasn't old enough to live.
Toys and
but 90% of that was just 47 million different Playmates with a different head stuck on.
They made a toy of everyone. They made a toy of the Tom Paris mutated fish man from Threshold.
Yes.
Everyone wants that now. See,
the smart amphibian.
It was a good move.
But yeah, this is the first time in a long time where I've seen Star Trek in kind of an upward trajectory where it looks like it is expanding. I remember when DS9 ended and then there's just Voyager. It's like, oh, we switched back to only one show. And then Enterprise came out and the ratings,
automatic second show.
The ratings just went down like every year. And then season 4 was going to be on Friday nights. And it's like, oh, this is really going to be the end. Like they're actually going to cancel Star Trek. And so now that we're going to like the 2020s, this is the decade. This is the first time in a long time where it feels like Star Trek is just expanding, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, and it's culture. It's people right after the first Kelvin movie, and people were like, "We want it back on TV," which was true. And Star Trek is really true on TV with episodic adventures, which is true. That's why I love people that talk about the Star Trek movies, which is a thing, but it wasn't invented to be a movie. It was meant to be continuing characters, episodic, yada yada. And the movies were like gravy, and we don't have to live with that. But people wanting it back right now, which would be awesome. But part of it was like they ran the well, even doing a prequel Enterprise. It's like they ran the well dry. It's like, guys, there were 20 years that we forget about in hindsight between original and Next Gen. And it wasn't just a change of people. It was TV technology, the culture's technology. Like you had to have some kind of distance. You know what I'm saying? For us to see things in new ways and new eyes and bring fresh blood to it. You think, oh, it's been 15 years since Enterprise ended, and we've had these dips and dabs, but part of this is just look how much the shows have evolved. The writing as a structure has evolved for the new day. and people just ramping up. And of course, it's short season, so it's like they have to work twice as hard, even though it's the same amount of real time. But some of this stuff is like it's just now finally able to do this, even if we'd wanted to do it earlier, with any real kind of distance to make it fresh. It's just time. It's just we're not prophets. I did a Trekline Tuesdays on this. I'm sorry we're not the prophets, and we can be linear. I mean, we can be non-linear, but we are stuck in a linear time where things have to move along, before we can have some perspective.
Well, it's moving along in a good direction right now, I think. And most people seem to agree to that. I mean, the haters are always going to hate, but overall, it's definitely. But
they're losing their market
exciting.
Share.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
That's another positive sign.
Well, yeah, you could push the story, and even I at one point really believed it, because when there was just Discovery and I looked at it and I was like, this is not something that I like. You could push that story that Star Trek was going to crash and burn. And even I kind of believed it. I was like, hey, you know what? Star Trek isn't like Discovery isn't going to do well. And if it's canceled, then we're screwed. Because if Discovery, the big comeback for Star Trek, didn't work, then it was. But now you can't say that anymore. Because even if one show crashes and burns, it's like, I don't see how Star Trek at this point in time now could all of a sudden crumble and go away within the next few years. That's not feasible. If Strange New Worlds is a catastrophe for some reason, and everyone's like, how the hell did they screw this up? That doesn't take away from Lower Decks. It doesn't take away from Picard, or for what maybe Prodigy will be. You know what I mean? I think it is going up, and it can't crash and burn. I'm not afraid at this point. I'm just happy.
That's why I said a couple of these things I've said week to week on Tuesdays Live, but yeah, just imagine if there hadn't been a TV revival. All the Sturm und Drang with the world looked at Star Trek by the only Star Trek there was, which was the movie franchise. Just imagine if all there was the drama over what Star Trek 4 would be. And is Holly going to do it? Or is it going to be Terrence? I mean, that was enough of a sideshow anyway, but that wrapped up with the whole, Paramount can't get Chinese backing, so they can't even afford to pay what they promised Pine and Hemsworth. And then, it's on the level of, big Hollywood gossip and big Hollywood, that kind of reporting. If that's how the outside world, outside fandom saw Star Trek, if that's all there was, and that will they, won't they, will they, won't they? Oh, and then now the remerger, and now what are they going to do? It's like, how pointless was that to what we all really cared about? That would have, but it wasn't. We had all this other, and for better or for worse, we had all the other, like you just said. If something blew up, we've got that. And thankfully, that's just a little thing about, thank God we've got these shows moving along. And if one blows up, the other thing was Discovery was never going to be canceled because they hung a whole new corporate aid. It's like UPN with Voyager. It's like all the crap that some of those early Voyager UPN shows, like 7 days, some of those, they really had no business canceling. It's like, oh my God, like 5 years later, they're like, why did we do that? But they had to measure up to NBC and CBS, and how stupid. But they hung on to Voyager because they knew nobody would be watching if they took Voyager off. And that's like All Access, soon to be P+. It's like, no matter what because if it had been any other franchise and or any other enterprise business thing, they would have pulled the plug on. If you'd had a creator come in and blow up and have to hire people and they had to keep throwing money at it, that would have, anything else that would have been jerked. The beginnings of Discovery, and delay and delay, that would have been gone. But because it was Star Trek, but also because they had staked their reputation on launching All Access with it, and the good wife life fight, whatever it was, but because there was no way they were going to cancel it, and no way they were going to cancel it after a couple of years because they had the cred of the franchise. It's like they had contracts. They were going to lose bukus of money if Motion Picture did not come out on the 7th. So throw the money at it until it's fixed. Everybody in Hollywood and their dog is blowing on wet prints of visual effects elements to get the damn thing done. Literally, that's what people have told me. To get it done, and they shipped the prints wet to theaters because if they didn't, Paramount would have lost a ton of money and they would have tanked. But it was one of those cases where it was going to happen. It was insane, but it was going to happen. So the whole thing about canceling Discovery, the first even couple of years, was just stupid. But people don't, But again, that's context. That's context not being just for kings. So, yeah. So yay 2020, 21. Yeah, yay 2021, I should say.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's no reason to be afraid at all now the way Star Trek is going. I think the state of the franchise is just going well. Even if one show does blow up,
Boldly going.
It is. I hope that's my thing. I hope there's one show that boldly goes just a little bit more than how fun the others are going, right?
My secret fan, the year I go to anything live anymore, but the year I go to San Diego and some Star Trek thing has broken open to where every other little 12-year-old or every other 15-year-old cosplayer is in some breakthrough Star Trek outfit, then that will be like, oh my God. I didn't know if, like, at first I thought maybe Jayla would be that. Not really. And then I thought, well, maybe something for all the aspirational representational, maybe it'll be Gray and Adira. I don't know. I bet it'll pop up a lot more than it would have otherwise. But the year that every other person is like in a Star Trek thing at San Diego Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con, then that'll be the wow moment for me.
It might be Prodigy that does that, actually.
And it could be, yes, because that's their age bracket, their demo.
Well, hopefully we find out later this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing like the development of that show and like we start promoting it and we get trailers and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot to look forward to in 2021, even with the bigger live action shows being delayed. I think that's probably like a good note to close out on. So
Prodigy could be the most subversive Star Trek of all, in a good way.
Only time will tell.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of y'all for taking time to chat with me today. It was a lot of fun. And I just want to let everyone know who is watching or listening to this that you should check us out next week. I will be having a conversation with Jesse Gender about the LGBTQ representation in Star Trek, and specifically, what we saw last year in 2020 in Picard, Lower Decks, and Discovery Season 3. So that'll be fun, and I hope everyone can come and check that out. And until next time, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek, and follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.